This tutorial is for beginners in watercolour, and it's mainly going to be about paint to water ratio, how to mix colours and how to mix them working light to dark. I'm going to use just 3 primary colours, and I'm going to show you how to mix those primary colours together as well, talking about paint to water ratio and how to mix certain amount of paint to change the colour. I'm going to go into great depth with that, but keeping it really simple as well. And I'm going to share with you one big tip right at the end of this tutorial. It's something that I've learned over the 30 years of teaching that many of my students do and didn't realise they're doing it until I pointed it out. And in this tutorial, I demonstrate why sometimes if you are doing this, how it can really affect your colour mixing. So I hope you find that helpful. Let's get started. So when you start in watercolour painting, you're going to have your box of watercolour paints, paper, brush, etc. Water pot, very important, water. And I usually use this either a towel, or it's like an old dishcloth here, or a paper towel to help me sort of control the water on the brush. It just gives you a bit more confidence. You know, sometimes you buy a watercolour palette like this. They come in pans, they're little cakes of watercolour, and they're sort of semi-moist, and you put some water on them and they make colour. These are all pretty moist because I use them quite often, but you basically add your colour like that, to pick off the colour, add water, etc. But what I find when you're mixing up very large washes, or you want to just you want to have plenty of paint on your brush, I find it much easier to use tubes of watercolour, and that's what I'm using here. This is Winsor Red, and I tend to just squeeze those in there. They don't get wasted because they'll dry like pans again, and you just spritz them with water. You can use a spritzer bottle like this to wet your paints, to get that. I usually do that sort of 20 minutes before I start painting, and it just moistens the paints up, makes them easier to lift paint off, and that's tube or pans. But if I know I'm using particular colours, and today I'm using Ultramarine, Lemon Yellow and the Winsor Red, and the Lemon Yellow Winsor Red are by Winsor Newton, and the Ultramarine is by Holbein. I'll put a list in the description below of some colour alternatives as well. When you're painting and practising colour mixing and mixing colours, pigment with water, and working light to dark, doing something like this is such good practice, especially if you're a beginner. It really does help to build confidence, just like piano scales for someone learning to play the piano. And when I'm painting, I just like to have plenty of paint. I don't like to be scrubbing with pans. So if I know I'm using certain colours, I'll just make sure I squeeze out that colour again. You start with a clean palette as well. That's quite important. And clean water. So I'm going to show you how I work light to dark, and also this will help you with the pigment and water ratio. So let's start off with the yellow. So I tend to, in watercolour we work light to dark, so let's just get a pinch of yellow and lots of water. Really important thing in watercolour painting is, if you're painting a large area, make sure you mix up a big puddle of paint, more than what you need, because there's nothing worse than trying to mix up that same colour and your paint is drying on your paper, and then you're going to have maybe cauliflowers and things like that, because by the time you mix up the right colour, your paint is drying on the paper, so you'll end up putting wet paint into drying paint, and that's where you get cauliflowers. So always mix up plenty, and you can always use that puddle for other colours later, so there won't be any waste. So I'm starting off with this very pale yellow colour. So let's just start here, top left. I'm just going to leave a little space there so it'll tell me what colour I'm using. The next most important shade in watercolour is the white of the paper, believe it or not. So I'm going to leave 2 spaces there. So my first little box is just going to be this really pale yellow. And if you find there's too much puddle there, you can rinse your brush, take the excess water off, wipe it on the paper towel and collect that puddle there. so it controls the brush. So I'm just going to add a touch more yellow. Yellow is the lightest colour you're going to pretty much get in watercolour painting, besides white of course, and it gets contaminated very quickly, so always make sure your palette's really clean, because otherwise a tiny touch of blue or red or any other colour will change that yellow more than it will a strong blue or grey. So that is a touch more yellow. I'm just getting a pinch with my brush here, but what you don't want to do is use a big brush to colour mix with, because when you've got a smaller brush, I've got a size 8 here, you can use a size 6. What you don't want is a large brush because you'll lose control, especially sort of adding water, etc. So I've added a pinch more paint here, and you can see there the colour is changing. It's getting slightly darker. And what's happening, because the paint is thicker, I'm using more pigment, the light of the paper isn't coming through as much. Here it's very transparent, and watercolour is a transparent medium, so the light of the paper is reflected through, and the thicker your paint, the less light of the paper coming through, and it looks darker. So what I'm doing here now is I'm just literally getting some more yellow here. What you don't want to do is add so much paint when you're painting darks that you lose the light of the paper, because sometimes it makes your paintings look flat. So don't use watercolour like oils. The only time I would suggest using it straight from the tube is really right at the end of the painting, if you want a few dark accents here and there. So this is my last attempt at mixing the colour. So literally, this is why I find tube paint really helpful. So I'm actually going to just use it. I'm not even going to add it to that yellow mix. I'm just going to go straight on here. Now it's quite hard to paint a dark yellow because it's such a light colour. But here we are. There's the darkest yellow I think I'm going to get, and that's pretty much straight from the tube. So you can see here, that's the white of the paper, and we're gradually getting darker by adding a pinch more paint. And it does take practice sort of getting this sort of scale of light to dark, but with the more practice of doing this, the more confident you'll feel about mixing colours in watercolour, working light to dark. So I'm just going to write down that colour. So the next one is Winsor Red. So I would suggest changing your water. Right, lovely clean water. Let's start off with the white of the paper again. That's your lightest light. So let's start again with a pinch of the Winsor Red, very, very pale wash here. And I'll just paint it there like that. And again, we've got a puddle there. So I'm just going to take off that excess paint, because obviously you use more water to make the paint lighter, more transparent, and that way again you get that light coming through the paint there. So what I'm going to do now is I'm adding a little bit more paint to that, and again you might want to touch that there to control your brush, and I'm just going to paint that next shade, and as you can see there, slightly darker. What I'm going to do now is I'm just going to add a little bit more of that red. This is a mid-tone, and don't be afraid to adjust these. If you feel it's not the right shade, just add a bit more paint, or if you feel it's too dark, just add some water and water it down a little bit, and you can do that in your painting as well. So I'm going to add a pinch more red, just using the tip of my brush. Don't dunk it in, so just take a pinch like that. I feel like that's too much. If I show that to the camera, it's too much on my brush. If you're not sure, just give that a little wipe there like that, then add. So get that control. Don't feel that's a waste of time. Just take your time. Now that's very similar to that. So I feel I can add a bit more paint and then go back in even a bit more. So you get that sort of darker red there. That's better. So you get that control and that paint to water ratio, so it's got less water and more paint. Okay, and I'm going to make that literally like I did with the yellow. I'm going to go straight from the tube. Now there's enough water on my brush to sort of, so it's not literally straight from the tube, there's a tiny bit of water on my brush, and if I show you that there now, That's literally straight from the tube. I can't get any darker. The only way you can get these colours darker now is by using other colours, usually darker colours. And in my next tutorial, I will be demonstrating how to make these colours darker and to mix shadow colours for them. This is ultramarine. I'll just put ultra. It's quite a long word. So I've got my clean water and go somewhere completely different now with the ultramarine. Add lots and lots of water to that for this very pale shade. Leave the white gap here and paint on this really pale shade of ultramarine. I'm going to take the excess off there, get rid of that little puddle. Okay, using the tip of my brush, get a pinch more ultra. Paint this. This is all wet on dry. If you work wet on wet, the water on the paper dilutes your paint again, so you have to take that into consideration. So it's worth practicing that. So I'm adding a pinch more paint for my mid-tonal value here. Just painting that on there. Show you that. I love painting like this because even just doing this, you're learning about controlling your brush and the pigment to water ratio. But the other thing you're doing is you're building up that confidence, laying paint down, you know, controlling the light and dark, seeing that, and it's quite rewarding. Just paint that. There we are, slightly darker in tonal value. And now I'm not going to go to that puddle. I'm going to literally go straight from the tube here to paint that darker colour. And I think I could even make that a little bit, because it's got, I think my brush had these brushes hold a lot of liquid. So there we are. You can start doing tonal charts like this with your colours, getting light to dark, just for practice. And then when you get that, you can start mixing those colours together. And that gets interesting. So let's mix up the lemon yellow plus the ultra. So I'm going to start off with the yellow. And again, you can do a light version of this, a mid-tone version of this, or a dark version of this. I'm going to go mid-tone. So this is my mid-tone yellow. So I'm going to rinse my brush, take that off there just to control it. And I'm going to use a mid-tone blue. So I'm just going to get that mixed up as well. So I've got my mid-tone blue there. Give that a rinse. Okay, I'm going to change my water. This is my mid-tone yellow, and I want to paint a yellow green. So I want it mostly yellow with a touch of blue. There's my mid-tone yellow, touch of blue. And there's my yellow green. So it's about 80% yellow with about 20% blue. I'm adding another touch of blue, so it's just more blue. You can just go by eye as well. This is more green now, light green rather than a yellow green. So let's just change the colour slightly. I find this absolutely fascinating, by the way. So a touch more of that blue. So let's say it's 50-50 now. So this is more of a green, I would call it 50-50. If we add more blue to that now, we're going to start going more blue greens. You can see that change, that subtle change in colour, adding a little bit more of that, and actually a little bit of lemon yellow and ultramarine make some beautiful grey blues. I'm literally going to go straight from the blue now rather than going back into the yellow, so I can get more of that blue green there. And literally now I might get a touch more ultramarine in that, touch more. It's not quite gone back to ultra. Isn't this fascinating? So it's still kind of got a little pinch of yellow in there. So you could say that was 90% ultramarine and 10% yellow. I'm rinsing my brush now, so there's no contamination. Going straight into the ultramarine on its own, a little touch more to make it that mid colour. And here we are. There's the ultramarine. Look at that. That's just using two colours, and you get all that variety, and they're all kind of mid-tone. So you can imagine adding more water to those, you're going to get lighter versions of those colours and more paint, darker versions. Let's mix up now the lemon plus the red. What I always tend to do is, obviously I'll start with that one colour, so you know exactly what colour it is. Start with the yellow. So I'm working with a mid-tone yellow, and I'm going to start adding a tiny touch of red. I've got some lovely red here. I think this is kind of a mid-tone red here. So I don't want that much on my brush. I'm just taking that off there. I'm just adding that. Look at that. Already that yellow I can see has been contaminated. So this is a very yellow orange. Adding a little bit more red. There we are. That's pretty similar actually. So I'm just going to add a touch more of that red there. Just take that off a touch. This is where you can get the control. You don't have to just settle with the first colour. So there we are. Again, a little puddle there. So just sort of lifting off a bit with my brush. And I'm actually going to put some red here just so that it registers a little bit more. So going touch more, heading towards that red orange. Add a touch more. I don't think I'll have as many shades with this one as I did with the Ultramarine, but I'm getting more towards that red colour now, and just go straight in with that red here, a bit more water so it's a mid-tone, and there we are, that's my red there. Fascinating, isn't it? So my final lot of colour mixing here is red with Ultra. So I'm going to start off with a mid-tone red. Here it is. Maybe a touch more water in there. Oh, must change my water. Here's my mid-tone red. With the brush, just take a pinch of that Ultra. And it's already changed that red. There we are. Gorgeous colour. Pinch more, and what you'll find, because this is not a pink is a cool red, this is a warmer red, what you'll find is the colours start to look a bit brown, because in a warm red you have a little bit of yellow in there, and that's where you mix the three primary colours together, you will get brown. So I'm just going to add Ultramarine over here to that red, just to try and get that change of colour. That has changed slightly. There we are. We're heading towards this sort of middle, muddy, sort of brownish, sort of cool brown, reddy colour. We'll get, I think, quite nice greys and shadow colours. And I use this quite a lot for a shadow colour. It's quite nice and neutral and cool. And bit by bit, I'm going towards the Ultramarine. So I'm starting to, not mixing here now, mixing over with the blue over there. And again, that's a kind of a blue-grey. I would say that's a better shadow colour, or something maybe even between those two. It depends on the subject as well. And a bit more Ultra in there. There we are. So it's slightly contaminated with the red. So you would say that's got about, again, 90% Ultramarine, 10% red. I'm going to give my brush a good rinse now, because I'm just going to use the Ultramarine on its own. And just pop that here, just so you can see, and using clean water, and just painting that Ultramarine there as well. So you can see the water really controls the light and dark of the colour. So the more water, the lighter the colour, and the more paint, the darker the colour, because you're covering that white paper. And obviously when you're mixing colours, start off with the main colour, like the lemon yellow, and add a pinch of the other colour, in this instance the red or the blue, and then you can gradually add the other colour, changing the colour to get the shade that you require. The other great thing about this is you can keep hold of these colour charts that you've made, and you can see how to get that maybe mid-tone using that certain amount of water to paint ratio, but you can also use these colour charts to see how to achieve a certain shade. For example, 30% yellow with 70% blue will give you a blue-green, and this will become more instinctive, so you won't need to use the colour charts all of the time as well. Next, I want to share with you my one big tip that I really hope will be a game changer in your colour mixing. I noticed this with some of my students when they were colour mixing, so I hope you find it helpful. So the tip that I would like to share with you, it's about rinsing and cleaning your brush. So let's say you're painting some blue in an area. You painted a sky or something like that. Okay. What I see my students do, and this is what I want to share with you because it may really help, is they do this. They swish their brush into the water, but they don't touch the bottom of the jar to clean their brush. Now that gets most of the paint out, but let's see. There is, can you see that? And I gave mine a good swish. I find sometimes the students just tickle like that. I'm not being hard on them. It's just what I see and what I've observed. But what happens is that happens. So what happens then is they'll go into, let's say they want to paint a yellow flower. They'll go into that yellow flower like that, and they'll paint, I'll put that over here because it's run into my blue. They'll paint that like that, and look at that. That is contaminated by a little bit of blue on my brush. That's the yellow there. That's how you want to make it look. But look at that, it's been contaminated. This is what you need to do. Okay, I'm going to change my water again, mixing the blue. Right, instead of rinsing it here like that, you want to get your brush right down the bottom and clean that brush like that. Okay, and then go into your yellow. There's my yellow. I'm just going to put it side by side so you can see. Look at the difference. That's those two colours there. So that's sort of swishing it in the water. That's swishing my brush at the bottom, really getting rid of any sort of blue or any other colour paint. And I think that's probably something that I picked up from my teaching, and it's something I want to share with you because it could actually be a game changer for you with your watercolour painting. So I really hope you found this tutorial helpful, just with using just 3 primary colours, working light to dark, and then mixing them together as well. And also that top tip about rinsing your brush at the bottom of the jar instead of just tickling it in the water. It really does work, as you saw there. If you have any questions, please put them in the comments section below. And if you'd like to learn more about watercolour, get access to exclusive videos and downloadable outline sketches, why not think about joining my Patreon membership? Details about that can be found in the description below, and you can cancel anytime. Thank you so much for watching. Happy painting. Bye for now.